I stood alone in my cap and roads, watching other graduates hug their parents, give them smiles, laugh, take pictures, and create their own moments of happiness and pride. I stood among them, but I wasn't like everyone else. I was like a shadow, invisible, like a stone statue in the crowd. My parents weren't there. They were in another state celebrating my twin sister Rachel's graduation. I checked my phone again, ran my fingers across the screen, and reread their message. "We are so proud of Rachel's graduation. I can't wait to celebrate when you get home." I didn't expect anything else, but I still felt the pain of this text. Not a single word about my graduation, no congratulations, just dry, cold lines. Just another reminder that I will always be second. The second in their eyes, the second in their life. When I boarded the train home, I felt the same way I did when they forgot my birthday. I got up, went to the window and found an empty place, familiar to me, a place that has always been mine, only mine. I sat down and watched my native campus disappear smoothly through the window, covered with greenery and the noise of students' voices. They were all going somewhere, moving, creating their lives. And I was sitting on this train, absorbed in my own thoughts. The college I went to and worked at for so many years remained far beyond the horizon. And now I was leaving. I was leaving, and there wasn't a single soul to see this moment, to share it with me. I shouldn't have expected anything else. It has always been so. It's been like this from the very beginning, from the moment Rachel and I were born on the same day, but that's where our similarities ended. She was bright, sociable, and bright as a ray of sunshine, with our mom's golden hair and our dad's blue eyes. I was different, dark, withdrawn, quiet. My hair was dark brown, and my eyes were brown, and they didn't look like any of my parents' eyes. I sometimes wondered if I was adopted, but old childhood photos confirmed that Rachel and I were indeed twins, but not the same. The patterns were clear, like on a cake, where they always wrote, "Happy birthday, Rachel." Never "Happy birthday, Rachel and Robin." I remember once asking my mom about it, and she laughed and said, "Oh, we all know it's your birthday too, honey. We don't need to write this. We all remember that you were born on the same day." They always remembered Rachel. They always remembered her. I thought about it, closing my eyes and plunging back into my memories. I remembered our 16th birthday. Rachel was given a car, a small, used one, but still a car. I got the laptop. And although it wasn't a bad gift, I remember overhearing my dad and mom talking. He said they sold an old computer to save up money and invested in Rachel's car. There was always money for her. And for me, it's a laptop that I use for my school projects. Many people didn't understand me, but that laptop was a real salvation for me. I took him with me to the programming club, where for the first time I felt that there was a place where I was truly appreciated. Mr. Saunders, the club's counselor, was the first teacher who told me, "Robin, you have a gift." It was important to me. At that moment, I felt that maybe I wasn't so invisible after all. "You think otherwise, it's valuable," he said when I effortlessly fixed a bug in a project that others couldn't debug for days. And from the day he said those words to me, I began to believe that maybe I was worth something. On the train, I closed my eyes, remembering how I used that laptop to compile my portfolio when applying to college. I still remember how my parents reacted when I told them that I would not ask them for money for tuition. "We need to talk about college," Dad said over dinner. "We've put aside everything we could, but we only have enough for one of you. Rachel, the business program is prestigious. With her communication skills, she'll make the right acquaintances," Mom added. I cut her off by saying, "I got a full scholarship to the computer science program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I don't need your money." The shock on their faces was almost the same as the one I had felt all these years. Almost. When I told them that I had enrolled at MIT, my parents, my always self-confident parents, did not know what to say. "Did you apply to MIT?" My mother asked, looking at me in surprise. I almost couldn't help but smile when I told them that Mr. Saunders had helped me put together a portfolio. Who is Mr. Saunders? Dad asks. My coding teacher for the last 3 years. They sat and looked at each other, clearly shocked that I had achieved such success without their participation. They didn't know that I was walking alone the whole way. When the next station was announced, I returned to reality. 2 hours. And I'll be home. Although I've never felt that home is where my parents are. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology has become a much more real home for me than this old house where I grew up surrounded by their expectations and attention to Rachel. It was at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that I met Alex, and although it was only at the beginning, he and I already felt that we were going to walk this path together. We both felt uncomfortable being surrounded by such bright and ambitious people. We were both obsessed with coding, and our heads were full of ideas that seemed revolutionary and capable of changing this world, making it a better place. We talked about our future, about how we would develop something that would possibly turn the industry around. Every day we got deeper into our business, and every day I felt more and more that our project could become something more than just a hobby. As Alex would say, his eyes were shining with excitement when we discussed what our file sharing app would look like. We didn't even notice how the nights flew by. More than once, we sat at our computers until 3 a.m., engrossed in code and ideas, sleepless but full of energy. What about me? I would answer him, trying to temper my hopes, because I realized early on that we shouldn't expect too much, that the world doesn't have to adapt to us, and that our reality, no matter how much we believe in it, is just a few lines of code put together in one imperfect system. My rare calls home always followed a predictable pattern. Hi dear, Rachel has just been elected to the Student Council for Business. Rachel's internship is going so well that she may be offered a job after graduation. Rachel went to a party at the dean's house. And Mom would finally ask, "What do you do in your free time, Robin?" I started telling them about our app, how Alex and I were developing this file sharing platform that could really change students' lives by simplifying their daily tasks. My heart was pounding with rare enthusiasm. I really believed in this, in our work, in the idea that we had created. But as soon as I started talking about my project, my mom interrupted me, telling me about Rachel's neighbor from the Johnson family, the Johnsons from Johnson Pharmaceuticals. They invited Rachel to spend the winter holidays at a country house in Aspen. I was discouraged by this well-coordinated reminder that my life was only on the sidelines. I remained unnoticed, unimportant. With each conversation like this, it became more and more clear to me that my parents weren't interested in finding out what I was really doing. Rachel, her successes, her world, that was what came first. What about me? I sat quietly, sometimes nodding when someone remembered that I was there too, in my 3rd year, and I managed to do something with this project. But those were just words that didn't change anything. I was just a shadow against her light. But in the 3rd year, everything changed. Alex and I have finally improved our app. After countless sleepless nights, failed iterations, tests, and fixes, our brainchild is ready. A technology company from California noticed us, and after months of meetings and legal work, we sold our platform for an amount that seemed completely unrealistic to me at the time. $2 million. $2 million apiece after taxes. I sat in my dorm room for 2 weeks, not believing what had happened. I constantly checked the banking app on my phone. The numbers didn't change no matter how much I looked at the screen. $2 million. I was only 21 years old, and I had more money than I could have imagined. But I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell my neighbors or my classmates, and certainly not my family. They've never been interested in my projects before. Why would I share with them what happened? And even now, I wasn't sure how they would react. Maybe they'll take care of me if they find out I have money. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be perceived differently, so that my parents would suddenly start looking at me through the prism of their expectations and hopes. So I continued to live like an ordinary college student. I ate instant noodles, complained about the price of textbooks, and wore the same clothes until they were worn out. No one suspected that the quiet girl in the computer lab was a millionaire. A year later, I rode this train on a holiday that, of course, was not meant for me. My parents, as always, celebrated Rachel's success, celebrated her achievements, laughed, talked with friends, discussed her business successes, her planned internship at a large company. I sat with them, smiled, and pretended I wasn't in pain. I was sitting on the sidelines, as always, and although my successes were considerable, no one noticed them. I am Robin, the one who has always been in the background. My role always remained the same, and I felt like something was breaking inside of me again, but I pretended that it didn't matter to me. As always, the train slowed down as we approached my station. I packed up my things, took a deep breath, and prepared to enter a familiar world in which I had always been nothing more than a second-rate character. A world where they didn't notice me, didn't appreciate my efforts, where every step was just a backdrop for the victories and achievements of others. I pushed open the front door of my childhood home, and immediately heard the sounds of laughter and conversation coming from the living room. Colorful banners and a congratulatory banner with the inscription "Graduate" hung on the walls. All this was for Rachel, of course. She is the star of the evening, her successes, her victories. I shouted hi, dropping my bag in the hallway, as always, in a hurry to become invisible in this noisy and joyful world, which seemed to be too bright and alien for me. Mom, setting out a plate of sandwiches, turned to me with a slight surprise. "Oh, Robin, are you here?" she said, as if I hadn't been there for years. "The guests will arrive any minute. Will you help me arrange the napkins?" No hugs, no congratulations. The question was simple and self-explanatory, and her gaze was habitually indifferent. As always, she was absorbed in organizing Rachel's party, and I could only do her bidding in silence. I was laying out napkins, listening to the doorbell ring. Family, friends, neighbors, and relatives, each carrying gifts and cards for Rachel, strode into the house, filling it with noise and fun. I stood in the corner, smiling politely when I was introduced, but, in fact, remaining invisible, dissolved among the crowd. "Isn't it exciting?" The neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, gushed at my mom, not shy about her outright joy. "Rachel graduates from the business with honors. We couldn't be more proud." Mom beamed, her face broke into a satisfied smile that spoke for itself. It was her day, her daughter, her pride. Aunt Judy noticed me and came over, giving me a warm hug. "Robin, it's so nice to see you. How was your graduation?" she asked, not noticing how her voice sounded a little stiff, as if she herself was surprised by my presence. "Sorry, we couldn't come," she added, and I felt a little bitter that she didn't even try to hide her displeasure. "Everything was fine," I said, smiling, although at that moment it was difficult for me to hide my confusion. I said, "Thank you for remembering," even though I felt the phrase burn me, preventing me from revealing what was really bubbling inside. Aunt Judy looked around, frowning. "Wait, we're only celebrating Rachel's graduation today. What about Robin?" she asked, clearly perplexed. The conversations nearby subsided, and a barely noticeable tension appeared on Mom's face, which immediately disappeared. She blushed, hesitating slightly. "Of course, we're celebrating both of our daughters," she said, as if that was supposed to reassure everyone. "Robin just arrived, so we didn't have a chance to put her name on any of the decorations." Mom said this with such an expression that I could have sworn she felt her words sounded ridiculous and inappropriate. She hurriedly added, "We just didn't have time," she continued with a smile, as if making excuses, "so we don't have the opportunity to put her name on banners." But, of course, my victories were not included in the plans for this holiday. Dad, who was standing nearby, cleared his throat approvingly and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast to our amazing daughters," he said proudly, and I felt my heart involuntarily slow down. Maybe they finally recognized my graduation. Maybe they finally noticed that I'm not just a student, that I mean something too. But at that moment, I saw Dad, still looking at Rachel with delight, talking about her as if I were just a shadow that couldn't make itself known. Rachel graduated from the business program with honors, he said, his voice filled with a solemnity that left no room for doubt. Your mother and I couldn't be more proud. He was smiling, raising a glass to his daughter, but I knew that this toast was not for me. He was for Rachel. And even though they called her amazing, in fact, she was the one who embodied their pride, and I was the one who had to stay in the shadows. After everyone applauded, I clapped my hands too, just to not stand out. I tried to pretend that it didn't hurt, that I didn't care, but it wasn't like that. I felt a strange mixture of resentment and amusement, a bitter ironic joy, as if with some respect for those who did not notice me. I wonder what they'll say about me? I thought, standing there among the guests, who were no more interested in me than they were in the next dish served. But then Dad turned to me and, coughing slightly, said, "Robin, come here." He reached under the table and pulled out a wrapped package that I instantly recognized. "Congratulations on completing your studies," he said, handing me a gift. I took the package and unwrapped it, and inside I found a book called How to Become a Millionaire, a step-by-step guide. "We thought it would help you on your way," Mom said proudly, and her eyes sparkled as she presented this gift as her personal contribution to my future. We found great reviews about the book on the internet. Rachel snorted, and then quickly hid it behind a cough when she noticed Aunt Judy's disapproving look. "I'm sure Robin will get rich someday, too," she said, patting my hand. "After I get my business up and running, maybe I can give you some advice." I stared at the book, feeling my chest constrict with a strange mixture of resentment and amusement. If only they knew. I could tell them that I already have money. A lot. Much more than they could have imagined. But I didn't say anything. "Thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate that." The dinner continued in the same tone as all previous discussions. Most of the conversation revolved around Rachel's future plans, her business ideas, her connections, her potential. It was her night, her moment, and she proudly shared every step, every achievement. All the conversations on the table, all the glances, all the questions that could arise, concerned her exclusively. I sat there, as always, in the shadow of her success, holding back my deep irritation and not trying to interfere. Everyone was waiting for her, and it was too obvious. I excused myself early, citing fatigue from the trip, and took advantage of the moment to retire upstairs to my old bedroom. It was the best thing I could do at that moment. I knew that no one would find me in this room, that here, among the old memories, I could be myself for a while. My children's room has remained virtually unchanged since school. Posters of technology pioneers still hung on the walls, as a reminder of the days when I looked forward to the future with hope and believed that I could make a difference. There were bookshelves filled with programming manuals and science fiction novels, and a desk where I spent countless hours coding while Rachel went to parties and games. Everything was the same as before, everything remained in this place, in this time, where I once dreamed of something more, something that could never be mine in this house, in this world, where there was always someone more important. I sat on the bed and turned over the book How to Become a Millionaire in my hands. The irony was almost too perfect. This book, a gift from my parents, was just a symbol of how they perceive me, a loser who still needs advice to achieve something. I could smile if I didn't feel this pain in my chest. My phone vibrated with a message from the real estate agent I contacted before graduation. "I have found the perfect apartment that meets your requirements, available for display tomorrow at 10 a.m., the message read. I smiled, imagining the faces of my parents if they found out that I was going to buy an apartment, my own, without a mortgage, without roommates, just me and my new house. It would have been like a revelation to them, as it probably was to everyone else who knew me. But before I could continue my thoughts, a soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Aunt Judy. She rang the bell and stuck her head in, as if she was a little nervous. I just wanted to check on you, she said, coming in and sitting next to me on the bed. It was strange and a little uncomfortable to sit with her here, in this room, where I once felt so insignificant, but now everything was different. I shrugged my shoulders, because I'd been used to this feeling for a long time. How are you? Is everything okay? She asked, and I sensed her concern, though hidden behind the stern expression on her face. I looked at her, trying to hide my confusion. I shouldn't be here, she said suddenly. You graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. For God's sake, this is unbelievable. I was a little confused, but I answered anyway, thank you, Aunt Judy. I knew that she didn't often express such words, and her confession was important to me. Suddenly Aunt Judy didn't look like someone who expected me to be approved, but someone who genuinely admired my victory. You'll be happy. Do you have any prospects? What is it? She asked, not hiding her interest. Actually, yes, I said, and the words just slipped out of my mouth. I signed a contract with Nexus Tech last month. I'm starting in 2 weeks. Aunt Judy's eyes widened in surprise. Nexus Tech is a big company, Robin. That's great, she said, and I felt a rare moment of pride. My parents never asked about my progress. They weren't interested in what was going on in my life. But Aunt Judy, she was genuinely happy for me. The salary is good too, I'll be fine, I continued, trying to sound confident. Even better than fine, I'd say. At that moment, I felt something rising inside me, as if a small spark of hope was starting to ignite. Aunt Judy was visibly surprised and smiled. Can you show them? She asked, and there was the same amount of surprise in her voice as in her eyes. I shook my head. They didn't ask, I said, and I felt her sigh full of sympathy. I've never understood how your parents get hung up on Rachel. You're both exceptional in your own way, she said, and I felt her words, despite all their kindness, get a little bitter. After Aunt Judy left, I closed the door and went back to my laptop. I logged into my bank account just to calm myself down, even though I already knew what was going to happen there. $2 million. More than my parents have accumulated in their entire lives. More than they gave Rachel to start her business. The thought of revealing this information made my stomach clench with worry, but also with a strange forbidden excitement. What will their faces look like? Will they finally see me? I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling, imagining what would happen if I decided to show it. I could stay silent, continue to be invisible, or I could finally show them what their daughter, whom they forget, has achieved. The next morning, I woke up early and packed my suitcase, because I had made a decision the night before. It's time to stop hiding your success, not for the sake of their approval, but for the sake of your own completion, in order to take a step forward. I picked up the book How to Become a Millionaire and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account, took a screenshot showing my $2 million balance, and printed it out. I carefully hid the printout in the book and went downstairs, ready to show my parents what I had finally achieved. My family was already sitting at breakfast, and Rachel, not hiding her pride, told Mom and Dad about her plans to open a small marketing agency focused on small businesses. She spoke with such enthusiasm that one might have thought that she had already signed a contract with future clients and was ready to announce the start of work right now. Her speeches sounded confident, with clarity and ambition, which she had been striving to demonstrate in front of everyone since childhood. Just to rent an office space, of course, she needed to find a place that would look impressive to show customers, as she put it, something in the city center that would be visible and make the right impression. It all sounded like an ordinary morning message, but I could already feel my nerves, stretched to the limit, about to snap. When I entered the kitchen, Rachel was still talking about the plans, and Mom seemed to be listening eagerly, as always, listening to every word. I poured myself a cup of coffee, and with this gesture, I symbolically immersed myself in the reality that was just beginning for me, unlike all their habits and routines. "Oh, morning, Robin," Mom said, without taking her eyes off Rachel. I answered her in silence, without making a single unnecessary move. But this time, my mind wasn't on that conversation at all. I opened my mouth to finally say what had been boiling inside for a long time, and said, breaking the usual silence of the morning table, "I'm leaving today." My words immediately caught their attention. Dad almost dropped the newspaper, and for a moment his eyes became wary. "You've just arrived, you need to take care of something," he said, but I saw his gaze turn in my direction. He knew I was going to say something, but he wasn't expecting it. I didn't wait for them to object, but continued, "I found an apartment in Cambridge." Mom didn't seem to understand what I meant. She looked confused, as it usually happens when one of us decides to do something unpredictable. "You just graduated from university. How can you afford an apartment?" She sounded like she didn't believe it herself. I knew she didn't understand how I could afford something like this. Is it okay when your daughter, who hasn't started working yet, buys an apartment? But I didn't care. I just replied that I already had a job. I signed a contract with Nexus Tech, and I started in 2 weeks. Dad, hearing these words, looked a little surprised, but quickly tried to hide it behind his usual restless posture. "A software company," he repeated, as if checking to see if that was really what I said. He obviously wasn't sure what I was saying, and tried to tease me a little. "Well, good for you, but you'll still need roommates. Apartments are always shared first." Rachel, sitting across from him, nodded understandingly, as if confirming his words. "You're going to live with 5 other programmers in some tiny place," she said, not hiding her grin. I sipped my coffee, trying to hide my smile, even though I was amused by how they perceived me. Actually, I was going to live alone. It was a 2-room apartment with a study and good internet, ideal for work. But Mom, as always, couldn't miss the chance to inject her dose of realism into the conversation. "Robin, be realistic. Entry-level jobs don't pay enough, especially in Cambridge," she said with slight displeasure in her voice. "You do understand that you need to save for unforeseen circumstances. This is the foundation of any business." I could feel the tension hidden in her words, as if she knew she couldn't convince me. Rachel added, "You need to save money. These are the basic principles." I nodded, because I understood her, but it was all too familiar. I knew that the conversation would start going in circles again, that they would try to convince me to return to the usual course of their views on life. I took a sip of coffee, which I added soothing to my nervous system, and decided it was time to start following my path. "Speaking of business, I wanted to thank you for the book," I said, putting the book How to Become a Millionaire on the table. I thought it wouldn't be too noticeable, but I couldn't help but smile a little as I said, "I think you should take a look inside. There's something interesting there." Dad took the book and opened it, and it was at that moment that the printed screenshot of my bank account fell on the table. Mom bent down to look, and Rachel craned her neck to see exactly what had happened. There was a moment of silence in the room. All eyes were on the paper and on my face, and I could feel their gazes pressing heavily, as if they were expecting something but didn't understand what it was. "What is this?" Dad finally asked, his voice becoming strangely quiet, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "My bank account," I said simply, watching them try to make sense of my words. Rachel cried out in disbelief, $2 million. Is this some kind of joke? I took another sip of coffee, trying to appear calm, even though I had a storm of emotions inside me that I had been hiding for so long. "Not a joke," I replied, calmly looking at their confused faces. "Do you remember that app they tried to tell you about last year, which you didn't want to hear about? About my classmate Alex? I sold it to a technology company." Mom's hand went to her throat, and I could see her struggling to find the words. "Did you earn $2 million on the app after taxes?" she said, barely suppressing the tremor in her voice. I confirmed that this is the case, and that the deal was concluded about a year ago. Dad looked at me with a stunned look. "You've had this money for a year now, and you haven't told us anything?" he asked, and I met his gaze, feeling more and more disappointment building up inside me. If you were even a little bit interested in my life, you would understand that." Rachel's shock turned into something else, unspeakable and familiar at the same time, a calculating look that I've recognized since childhood. That look with which she always entered into a conversation when she was trying to turn the situation in her favor, as if everything that was happening was just part of her carefully planned scenario. There was no confusion in her eyes anymore, just cold confidence. For a moment she was no longer a younger sister, and in front of me stood a woman for whom the world had always been a field for maneuvers. "This is amazing, Robin," she said with mock delight in a voice that, despite its success, could not hide her inner struggle. And at that moment, her voice suddenly warmed up, became almost sincere, as if she was being comforted, and I saw in her the Rachel I remembered from childhood. "We should celebrate your success too. I always knew you were smart. It's worth celebrating." I knew that behind these words were hidden not only her congratulations, but also the desire to consolidate success, whether it was mine or hers. She always looked for benefits wherever she could. Mom couldn't seem to contain her emotions. She held out her hand to me across the table, her movements a little slower than usual, as if she was trying to decorate this scene with something similar to love in order to prove something to herself. "Robin, honey, we're so proud of you." The timidity of these words sounded almost foreign, unusual, and I noticed a certain strangeness in her voice, as if she had memorized these words, but could not put into them all the sincerity that she was trying to show. We were all sitting at this table, and everything around us was filled with something unreal, abnormal. I felt the weight of their approval, but at the same time, a chill stirred inside me, because I knew that something else was hiding behind these words, old ideas about how I should behave, what I should do and what I should be like. But I couldn't accept it anymore. I looked up and, not wanting to prolong the moment, said, "I'm leaving today." My answer took them by surprise. I saw Dad lower the newspaper a little again and return to the conversation we had started, but now there was some concern in his eyes. "You've just arrived, you need to take care of something," he said, lowering his voice, as if I might take it for concern, but I didn't pay attention to it. "I've already booked a train," I added, trying to hide how much I hated it all. It wasn't just an announcement about the move, it was a sign that something was changing in our house, that I was no longer the person they knew me to be. At that moment, I felt like a stranger. When the car pulled up, I said goodbye to them. "Goodbye," I said, opening the door. They remained standing on the threshold, and as I left, I felt their gazes pierce me, like a mixture of shock, confusion, and that Rachel's gaze that always knew how to calculate the situation down to the smallest detail. I closed the car door without looking back, and I felt their presence begin to fade, dissolving into memories, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. While my phone immediately started vibrating with messages and calls from all three of them, I turned it off, deciding that I didn't want to hear a single word right now. I didn't need their anxious calls, which would bring me back to the old world I was leaving. The train ride to Cambridge was quieter than at my parents' house, but it had its own comfort. There were no expectations, no questions, just me and my path. When I arrived at the hotel, I met with a realtor who took me to the apartment. I couldn't help but admire how perfect it was for what I imagined. Spacious, modern, with large windows through which the whole city seemed to lie at my feet, and, of course, a fast internet connection was what I needed to get started. I signed the papers immediately, without hesitation, and as I took the keys, I felt everything around me begin to transform. It was my place. My new home. An evening, after settling into my hotel room, I finally looked at my phone. 27 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Everything was the same. "We need to talk, please call us back. We are so proud of you, but we need to help." I turned off my phone and looked out the window again, where the lights of the big city were already beginning to glow in the silence of the night. And at that moment, I realized that this would be the first day of my new life, a life in which I was in control of everything from my fate to how this city would unfold. I no longer needed anyone's approval. It was my choice, my life, and I was ready for this path. It took a week before I decided to answer one of my mom's calls. All this time, I was busy arranging an apartment, arranging furniture supplies, and preparing to start working at Nexus Tech. But most of all, I enjoyed the fact that I didn't have to consult with anyone, that I could just live my life without the interference of other people. When I finally picked up the phone, my mom's voice sounded tense and worried. "Robin, thank God," she said, as if I had finally returned to their world, to their ideas of how my life should go. "We were so worried. Is everything okay?" I answered briefly, busy moving. But her voice immediately became more serious. "We need to talk," she said, her tone becoming practical, as it always was when she wanted to solve something important. "I knew your father too well, and I wanted to discuss something important with you." These words sounded so calm on the phone that I felt them penetrate me with a chill. Her mother's voice was always like that. It carried the weight of life that she was used to facing, and there was no deception or falsehood in it. She had never been used to outright rejection, and this moment was something unexpected for her, despite everything that had happened in recent weeks. "Could you come home this weekend?" she continued, and in her words, I felt the same urgency she used when she was trying to bring me back into her world. I took a deep breath, feeling my resolve grow stronger inside me. "I can't, Mom," I replied firmly, without even thinking. "I'm starting my new job on Monday, and I'm still unpacking." I see her face in my imagination, restrainedly surprised, not ready for the fact that I wasn't going to give in. It was my new start, and I couldn't afford to go back to where I just left. She was silent for a moment, but I knew she wouldn't give up so easily. The eagerness in her voice was unmistakable, as it always was when she was trying to get her way, and she seemed ready to do anything to change my mind. "Then maybe we could visit you?" Her voice sounded like a suggestion, but I immediately detected a hidden anxiety in it. It was her way of saying that she wasn't going to back down just like that. I knew that her plan hadn't changed. The family should be there, even if it meant breaking my boundaries. I met her gaze with her suggestion, and determination flared up inside me again. "Not this weekend," I said, trying to quell the irritation that was starting to build up inside. "What did you want to discuss?" I tried to sound as calm as possible, but there was already a hardness in her voice that she was used to ignoring. There was another pause in her reply, and she finally spoke. "Well, it's about Rachel's business loan," she said, and I felt something tighten under my heart. It was exactly what I expected. Amid all the alarm calls and messages she's been sending me in recent days, there's really only one goal hidden: my money. It wasn't a worry about me, it was a worry about what my money could do for them. "We thought, since you have such a wonderful windfall, maybe you'd consider helping us pay off the loan," she said, sounding like an excuse to snatch a piece of my life again and bring me back to their world. A family has to support a family, after all. I closed my eyes, trying not to let my anger get out. "No," I said, and despite my determination, I felt like she was probably going to disbelieve me. She sounded genuinely surprised, as if the possibility of rejection hadn't even occurred to her, as if I couldn't refuse her offer, because in her eyes I was part of their plan. "I won't give you the money to repay the business loan, Rachel," I repeated, pronouncing each word clearly. "It's not my responsibility." The silence on the phone stretched like a fork that I couldn't get rid of. "But we're a family," she finally said, and her voice got louder, as if she was trying to convince me of the truth of her words. I couldn't contain my inner sarcasm as I replied, "What exactly did you do for me, Mom?" Softly, almost in a whisper, but so clearly that she couldn't help but hear it. I continued, "My scholarship was paid for by college, I worked summer jobs to spend money, I built my career and my app without any support from your dad." The silence that followed was full of significance. I could hear her breathing on the phone, and that was all I could hear at that moment. Silence. I knew she couldn't answer that, because I was telling the truth, and she couldn't challenge it. Then, after a while, her voice rang out, and I felt its timbre change. She couldn't believe how selfish I had become in her eyes. "I'm not selfish," I replied, but this answer could not remove the expression of bitterness and misunderstanding from her face. I'm setting boundaries, I added, and I felt those words pierce the space between us like sharp knives. That was the final statement I made, and I couldn't back down from it. I took a deep breath and said I was thinking, I need some time away from you all. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk again. I didn't let her answer. I ended the conversation, and at that moment, something inside me broke away, as if I had escaped from the shadow of their expectations. Over the next few days, messages continued to arrive from my family. Dad tried a different approach, trying to congratulate me on my entrepreneurial spirit, suggesting that we talk about business someday. Rachel alternated between guilt trips and a sudden flashback to shared childhood memories that I was sure she had fabricated to make me softer. I couldn't believe how good she was at it, but I knew that her manipulations couldn't bring me back. I blocked their numbers, and for a week I needed space to focus on my new beginning. My first day at Nexus Tech was exciting. I walked into the office with the feeling that this time I was going to do everything for real. The corporate culture was what I imagined it to be: creative, complex, respectful. My team greeted me warmly, and it was not an empty greeting. My manager was impressed with my portfolio. The file sharing app you developed was brilliant, she told me during our first face-to-face meeting. That's why we hired you, we expect a lot. For the first time in my life, I felt that my abilities were truly appreciated, and not compared to someone else or ignored as a less interesting twin. I quickly made friends at work, and we started spending Friday night get-togethers at my place, ordering pizza and playing video games or discussing coding issues. These people appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could give them, and I realized what the real value of this relationship was. 4 months into my new life, Aunt Judy called. She didn't waste time on greetings and immediately said, "Your parents tell everyone that you are rich, but you refuse to help the family." There was no condemnation in her voice, but rather inquisitive curiosity, as if she was looking for an explanation of how I had come to such a life in which I could afford not to respond to their constant requests. I sighed, not surprised. They could have done something like that. Rachel's problems with her business probably reached everyone who was somehow connected with them. The aunt continued, "Rachel's business is going wrong." I had already expected this, but still she said it with obvious regret in her voice. It turns out that most small businesses don't want to pay high prices for marketing when they can do most of it themselves online. I understood that this was just the sad reality of their failure, but despite this, I couldn't help but express my sympathy. "That's unfortunate," I said, trying to smooth things over. "Don't worry, I've established a clear position in the family." These words were my attempt to close the conversation, which one way or another could not have led to good results. Aunt Judy suddenly became much softer. She seemed to feel that this conversation wasn't worth continuing, and decided to change the subject. "You know, most of us remember how they always treated you. No one blames you for keeping your distance." It sounded like relief, like confirmation that I had made the right choice. "Thank you, Aunt Judy," I said, sincerely appreciating her support. Her voice became clear and calm in response. "Tell me about your new job. Is that all you were hoping for?" We talked for an hour about my job, my new apartment, my friends. I told her about everything related to my new life, and it was an amazing feeling. I could speak openly without feeling like someone was trying to evaluate me by what I could give or how much I could offer. Not once during our conversation did Aunt Judy mention my money, or ask for anything that would normally be in her manner. When we hung up, I felt a heavy cloud lift off me. At that moment, I realized how important it is to maintain such connections, without expectations, without attempts to manipulate. 9 months later, after I took that decisive step, my mom called again. This time, I answered without hesitation. I wanted to know if something had changed in her life, and maybe in her relationship. "Robin," she said, and her voice was muffled, as if she was afraid to hear me say a sharp no again. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm fine, Mom, how are you?" I tried to sound neutral, not letting her feel like I was still gnawing at the thought that we hadn't been a real family all these years. Rachel's business closed last week, Mom said with a sigh, and I felt her words seep into me like a cold wind. Now she's looking for a permanent job. I was sorry to hear that her efforts weren't successful, but what worried me was that my mom kept saying, "Your dad and I manage the loan payments, but it's tight." She paused, as if she was about to say something important. "I'm not calling to ask for money, I just wanted to say that I've been thinking about how we treated you." I froze, not knowing how to react. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the realization that she understood me at least a little bit. Compared to Rachel, I didn't say anything. She continued. "I don't think I realized how much we favored her until you showed us this bank statement." I felt her words offend me, but still they didn't have the pretension that was present in her words before. It was a shock for us to see that you had achieved so much, and we hadn't even noticed it. The silence hung, and I felt the heavy burden that I had been carrying for so long gradually weaken. "Mom, you didn't have to spend $2 million to notice me," I said softly, not knowing why it came to my mind. And even though I wasn't ready to accept everything she was saying, her apologies took me by surprise. "I know," she added softly. "I'm sorry." Those words weren't too many, but they still awakened something important in me that I was still trying to suppress. "Thanks for telling me," I replied. "Could we go see your new place sometime? Don't give me pressure about a loan or anything, just to see you." I felt that this conversation could be an important step towards change. "I've been thinking about it, maybe in a few months. I'm still settling in," Mom said. "We'll wait until you're ready," she replied. "Robin, I'm really proud of what you've achieved." Her words sounded so sincere that I felt something in my chest finally opening up. When we hung up, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset over Cambridge. I wasn't ready to fully reconcile with my family yet, but for the first time in my life, I saw the possibility of a healthier future relationship based on sincere respect rather than financial need. My phone rang, and a message came from my colleague Zoe. "Team dinner at 7, are you in?" I smiled and replied, "Definitely." When I was going to meet my friends, I was grateful for the path that brought me here. I was an ignored twin, but now I'm a successful software engineer with a beautiful home and a meaningful relationship. I no longer needed the approval of my parents, who always looked right through me, and I realized that this was the most important achievement.